It's a pleasure to be here with you today. It's great that you have this kind of week where you celebrate each other's cultures. You have a wonderful diversity, as I can see here. So it's a pleasure for me to be with you. I want to talk to you about staying in the game, having staying power. When I talk about resiliency, what do you think about? I know for me, when I was at college, I went to Colgate University. I grew up in a Spanish-speaking home. I'm Puerto Rican, and my parents only spoke Spanish to us, and I only spoke English back to her. So I understood it, but I didn't speak it well. When I got to Colgate, I thought, I can take all the Spanish courses that are available and pass them with flying colors. And then I ran into a Spanish literature course where we're studying Cervantes, Don Quixote. And the book is probably about this thick. And it's kind of like Castilian's, old Spanish that I'd never read before. And it was the hardest thing I had ever done up until then. And I think I barely passed the course. But I had very little staying power and staying focused to get that coursework done. I was also an RA at Colgate, and I hated conflict. I'm an ENFP, if that means anything to you in terms of Myers-Briggs. And so high extrovert, but I hate conflict. I hate dealing with mediating issues. And yet as La Fed director, often I have to deal with some of those things. So I think, for me, there are some things I do really well, and there are other things I just want to give up very easily in. And conflict is one of those. And I could imagine for some of you, how many are athletes here? I heard you have a good football team here. Okay, all the athletes over here. All right. So I know some of you can work out for hours and you don't get tired, or you get tired, but you keep at it. And you have this dogged determination. There are others of you academically that you can take a course, and the harder it is, the more determined you are to pass it. And you have a wonderful tenacity. And that's an amazing quality. And I think it's also an important quality when we think about our Christian faith, that there are certain things that we have to have staying power in and resiliency in. And I think one of those is racial reconciliation or racial healing. And, because I hate conflict, it's really hard for me even to be here talking to you about this. I'd rather talk about love and peace, and although I think this is what this is all about. But for me as La Fed director, I've had to deal with these issues of racial reconciliation, seeking shalom as a church, and it's never easy, but I'm determined to continue to talk about it because I think there's so much hope here for the church. If we can get this right, I think we have so much to model for the rest of the world. But often what I see is people giving up because it is hard. It's hard to have conversations. It's hard to work through things. And we all have different reasons why we kind of give up on it, For some of us, it's because we don't know a lot about the issue. And so we figure, it's not my forte. For others, we feel like we're often ignored. Sometimes as a Latino, I feel like our voice is often not heard. And so it's very easy to feel like you can just back away from it. So we all have different reasons why we want to push away and not be determined in this issue. But it is an issue. It is something that we have to continue to grapple with and work through because the non-Christian church, the community is watching. People from outside are looking to the church to see how we deal with this. Some of you may be asking, I thought we were past race, right? We're post-racial society. We have a black president, and I've heard that often. But when you talk to ethnic people in America, they will tell you that we are far from getting this right, this issue. For black and Latino men, the issue of racial profiling is still a very, very serious issue. For the Native American community, being able to be heard and not being ignored is a very important thing, and it's happening. Asian Americans, even within the church, what you're finding is many Asian American leaders who are standing up and saying, we're tired of being stereotyped, even by the church. And you're seeing resources, Christian resources that are being developed with Asian American stereotypes that are just not appropriate and not right. And this is happening today. Even one of our well-known leaders, Rick Warren, did something, had something, posted something up that was not appropriate, and the Asian American community was very concerned about it. So this is something that's happening. It's real. If you are going to be future Christian leaders, you've got to be working on this. And I think this is the perfect, ideal space to do that. I'm sure you have a wonderful community here and you have no problem, so maybe this message is not for you. But I doubt that. There's a leader recently, Reverend Barbara Williams Skinner. She's a facilitator of the National African American Clergy Network. After the screening of 12 Years a Slave, which is a movie that just came out, I heard it's great. I think we should all see it. She mentions that race is the elephant in the room. Even if you even raise race today, you are race baiting. You are playing the race card. So how do we talk about this in a civil way, in a godly way that can help us to move things forward and to give us staying power in it? The passage that we read earlier from John 7:60-69, this passage comes right after, if you remember, Jesus fed the 5,000, and it was this incredible experience just out of a few fish and loaves. People were amazed. There were many who started to follow him just because there was food to be had. They wanted another meal. And but then he started to say some very harsh words. He started talking about eating my flesh and drinking my blood. And even as a Christian, sometimes I feel like, wow, it's just so harsh. Why did Jesus have to speak so harshly? He had so many people who were following him. And it seemed like he was almost, instigating certain things to see who the believers were, who the true believers were, and who they weren't. And then towards the end, there are many of his own disciples who decided, this teaching is too hard. What is he calling us to be cannibals? What's going on here? And then he turns to his disciples and he asks them this. Let me just read that last part again. Where is this? Okay. Now Jesus' disciples said, now you are speaking clearly. Let me see if I can find that now. Oh. Yeah, from 66. From this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. You do not want to leave me too, do you? Jesus asked the 12. Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God. So even in this hard issue, many of the disciples didn't stay, but his true disciples, the 12, said, Jesus, we know who you are. We've seen your miracles. We've seen your power at work. You have healed the blind. You have cared for the least among us. You've raised up Samaritans and women and centurions and tax collectors. And we know that you are who you say you are. You are the Holy One of God. And so his disciples decided, we may not understand all of this teaching, this harsh teaching, but we know enough about you that we're going to stay in the race. And I think when I think about this issue of racial reconciliation, it is hard. It will always be hard. We will always be a racialized society because that's who we are in our DNA as Americans. We come from everywhere. And that's the beauty and the pain of our American experience. And so if you want to be a post-racial society, you're probably going to need to move to another country. Because we're a racial society, we will always be racialized because it's who we are. And it's only going to become more so. And so how do we stay in there? And I think that's the difficult challenge is who's doing good work in this? I'd love to say that InterVarsity is doing good work in this. We've been at it for a long time, but we've made some serious mistakes ourselves. But that's part of what happens when you enter something that's hard. You will make mistakes. There will be challenges. You will have to apologize and ask for forgiveness and work through things again. We had a difficult challenge recently, probably about 7-8 years ago, with some of our prominent leaders, ethnic leaders within our movement, where there was a conflict that happened, words were spoken, and there was a very painful experience, and both of these people ended up, resigning. And and these were the two probably prominent leaders in our movement who could have helped us through this very conflict that we were going through. And it was a racial conflict. And so we fumbled for many, many years through this. And I feel like we're just beginning to heal up in this area. But it came in this idea of us staying the course and saying, no, we are going to pursue this. We're not going to give up. We're going to continue. We're going to move forward. And I appreciate even our president, Alec Hill, who was working through this, and he experienced some of the pain of this and could have easily, as a white man, could have found other employment anywhere else. But he decided, no, this is important enough that I'm going to stay and I'm going to work through this. I have a video for you, to show you now, and it's one of the things that we're trying to do within InterVarsity is we believe in multi-ethnic ministry, right? We have multi-ethnic chapters throughout the country, but we also believe in ethnic-specific ministry, and we believe that it's two sides of the same coin, right? If you're going to have multi-ethnic ministry, you have to have people in ethnic groups who have found their voice. Early on in my years within InterVarsity, there were very few Latinos, and we realized that none of us really wanted to speak individually for the Latino community until we started to gather together and started to talk about what we cared about, what we were concerned about, who we were as American Latinos, as part of InterVarsity, and we began to find our voice. That was ethnic identity development as a group that we were going through. And once we did that, then we were able to speak more strongly to the multi-ethnic setting that we were a part of. And so you can't have true, authentic, multi-ethnic, multicultural ministry and diversity if there aren't communities within that multi-ethnic group that can speak strongly and that has a voice and their voice in their concerns, their issues, their pains, and their struggles. And so that's why, even within InterVarsity, some people say, well, why do you have ethnic-specific ministry? We should be doing only multi-ethnic work. And it's because if you don't give ethnic people in America the chance to find who they are and to grow in that, they will never fully engage in the way they should in a multi-ethnic setting. And so this video is it's UT Austin, and our strategy there is to have ethnic-specific chapters that are also committed to each other. And so this is about them trying to figure out how to have ethnic-specific work and yet be committed in a multi-ethnic way together. So let's see the video. And what's happening too at UT Austin is that the chapters continue to grow. We have a Greek ministry there. We have I think a grad faculty ministry that just started. And so every year they write their names again. The new members write their name to this covenant that says, yeah, we're ethnic-specific groups, but we're going to be committed to certain things that we will always do together as a multi-ethnic ministry of InterVarsity. I want to close by just telling you a story in terms of my own willingness to stay in the game in terms of racial reconciliation. Like was mentioned in the introduction, I'm also a church planter with the CMA, and we planted the first English-speaking Christian and Missionary Alliance church. Any CMA folk here? Okay, great. We've got a few. Good. We were the first English-speaking CMA church in the Bronx, and trying to even plant a church in the Bronx, very, very few people succeed. In fact, I think we had 3 or 4 other plants that didn't succeed during that same time period. And But after a few years, about 3 or 4 years, our senior pastor and his wife started to have some difficulties. They decided to separate over their 3 teenage children. They didn't really agree on how to raise them. It's a very painful situation. He was one of my best friends. Eventually, he left the church and they got divorced. And a lot of members of the church who were part of his family, he was Irish. He was Italian, half Jewish. So our church was predominantly Latino and white at that time. So, but when he left, a lot of his family members left, and the church slowly began to become Black Caribbean. In fact, now we're about 80% Black Caribbean. And so our new pastor is African American, and his wife is Jamaican. Wonderful team, very powerful ministry. But I was at probably the lowest point in my life, in my ministry years, even as a Christian. Our church that I helped to plan, as I knew it, was no longer present in terms of what we were planning to do. We had a whole new leadership team. And then one of my best friends died, suddenly had a heart attack. Alex Anderson, he was the national director of our Black Campus Ministry and a mentor of mine. And he just had a sudden heart attack as he was walking in his neighborhood. And then on top of that, my father died as well, had a massive heart attack. And so, I had never experienced this much death in my life. And I just, I was tired emotionally, spiritually. I'll tell you, I was at my lowest point spiritually. And I was backtracking from my responsibilities at church because we had the new pastor. I wanted him to lead his way. And there was one service where the pastor's wife was speaking prophetically, as they do in the Black tradition, and was speaking to different people and calling out our sin. And so, it was difficult. Some of us received it well, but we weren't used to that as a church. And then she called me out in terms of where she felt I was failing spiritually, And so to be the assistant pastor and to be called out in the midst of the congregation was, I think, for me, the most embarrassing, humiliating thing that could have happened to me. And so this created a lot of tension between us. And I didn't really know how to approach her. I felt that there were certain things that should have been told to me in private. And so, we talked for a number of sessions and eventually worked through it. But I came very close to leaving the church at that point. Very, very close. But God kept telling me, no, you talk about racial reconciliation and staying at the table. Well, this is your chance now to do that. Well, eventually we worked it out, and now the church is flourishing. We've been growing. We've been growing in our diversity as well. And there's just such a spirit of love in our church like I've never seen before. But it came out of about 3 or 4 really hard years of us as leaders working through our cultural issues and finally coming out of that at the other end. So what I've realized about racial reconciliation is that it is really hard. But because we don't stay in the game, we don't see the other side of it, which is human flourishing, which is what the Bible talks about in terms of shalom, which is a sense of peace and joy in the way things ought to be. And so if you come to our church now, you feel that spirit of shalom, which wasn't there before. And it came out of staying in there and being willing to work through even the most painful things. I'll end with that last passage. This is probably one of my favorite passages in Scripture, where Jesus is actually praying for us. He prays for his disciples, but then he prays also for those who will come later and will believe later because of the disciples' witness, which is everybody here in this room. And what he prays is not for right doctrine or for, success. What he prays is for unity among the church, among believers. And he says this, "My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Isn't that beautiful? The idea that, not only does Jesus, he prays for us, which I think is touching, but then he prays that we would be one in the way that the Trinity, right? The Father and the Son are one. That's a very powerful image for us as believers. And he says that when we do that, when we have this complete unity, that it will be a witness to the rest of the world. And I know, hearing about a lot about missional movements that are happening, but one of the things that we're not talking about a whole lot is that the greatest testimony to being a missional church is getting it right in terms of reaching this unity in the body. And that happens through racial healing and racial reconciliation. And so imagine the church being the model, setting the pace, the tone for our country in this area. I don't think it's happening. Sometimes, if you read Divided by Faith, right, you see that sometimes the church is the biggest culprit when it comes to division in terms of races and ethnicities. But I think we can change that. And I think this generation can play an important role in that. Thank you.